Hi. Okay, welcome. This week, again, like I said, I remember I spoke about this a little bit last class. We're on a different schedule in Israel versus everywhere else in Chutz La'aretz in America. So again, this week we're going to be reading in Israel Parashat Behar, and everyone else in America and everywhere else in Chutz La'aretz is reading Parashat Emor. So what I decided to do, also because next week is Lag BaOmer, so there won't be a class. So I decided to talk about topics in Emor and a topic from Behar, and hopefully connect them. There's a lot of things going on in these parshiot, so definitely not going anywhere near all of it. But I chose to zone in on two things that will hopefully together give us a broader sense of both. So yeah, so the topics I want to talk about are Shabbat and Moadim, and the holidays and Shabbat that are found in Parashat Emor, and Shemita and Yovel, which are found in Behar, Parashat Behar. And I want to zone out for a second and talk about the fact that we started mentioning in the last class, how we had a sort of turning point in Vayikra, that now we're transitioning from being a Mishkan-centered, focused book, and now we're sort of taking that Mishkan experience into the slowly, right? We're still going to be very Mishkan centered and about the Kohanim and about the Mishkan, and the Korbanot, but it's going to be slowly going a little more community centered, people centered, more broad to the whole nation as opposed to just the Mishkan and the Kohanim. So we're going to see that here too, that balance of Mishkan centered and more general centered, more nationwide center, so to speak, in the presentation of what's going on. We'll talk about now in these topics. So in Parashat Emor, we have a discussion. We have the Hagim and the Shabbat that are brought up, right? And it's interesting is that this is the Hagim and the Shabbat, the Parashat, the portion, the Torah portion, not the Parashat, the Torah portion that we read on the Hagim, even though the Hagim are mentioned. I know a few other times around the Torah. So we see I want to look here and see when anything is mentioned more than once in the Torah, we want to look at why it is mentioned here. What is the context of it being mentioned additionally here, adding to us and teaching us and giving us that we didn't get in the other times it was mentioned? Because why is it repeating itself if it's not adding something? So that's what I want to sort of keep our eyes open to in this case of the Hagim. But anytime you have a story or a halacha or a story or a mitzvah that repeats itself in the Torah, you have to sort of think to yourself, what is this doing here again? So it could be maybe to compare it to the other times. It could be to add an additional thing for many different reasons. So here I want to look at what are we gaining from this presentation of the Hagim, and what is it supposed to add to our understanding and experience of these holy days. So first I want to point out for a second that in our calendar year, in our Hagim, we essentially have two categories of Hagim, if you think about it, right? It's not necessarily so obvious to us today because we don't have the Beit HaMikdash, but in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, it was very obvious, because the two categories are the Shloshat Regalim, when we were commanded to go up to Hamakom Asher Yibchar, up to the Mikdash, and those are Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, right? Where we would have to literally close up our houses and go up with our families to do Korbanot in the Mishkan, in the Beit HaMikdash. And then we also have Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the Yamim Noraim, right? The judgment days or the days of awe, which we wouldn't be commanded to do a lot of things, but we're not commanded to go to the Mishkan, the Makom Asher Yibchar. And either if you lived in the area, if you lived in Yerushalayim, you might have gone to see the avodah of the day, right? Especially on Yom Kippur, there was Avodat Kohen Hagadol, which was a big spectacle to see and be involved in. But it's not that everyone was there. Whoever was able to be there was there, right? And everyone else was in their house, in their own city. Same with Rosh Hashanah. If you were able to get there, you would go. If you couldn't, you wouldn't. As opposed to the Shoshalim, where you had to go. So there is this two types or categories, so to speak, of Hagim, and just that's something to be aware of, and we'll add a little more of that as we go. Also, we have. I said there was many times that we mentioned the Hagim. So in Sefer Shemot and Sefer Devarim, when we mention the Hagim, it only discusses the Shosh Shagalim. And when we get to Sefer Vayikra here and Sefer Bimidbar, we not only have the Shosh Shagalim, we mention all the holidays, meaning the Shosh Shagalim and the Yamim Noraim. So that's also something to be aware of this complete a discussion of all the important days of the year. So I want to start by going before we, really get into the reason and the understanding of what is the significance of all this. I want to look and talk about, which will help us get there, hopefully, is to talk about the names and the way we call the Hagim here. And I don't mean each Chag specifically, I mean the Hagim in general. We keep calling them Moadim, Moadei Hashem, Ela Moadei Hashem, right? The Moadim. And this comes from the word, and there's, before I go, there's many ways we could call the Hagim. We could call them a Chag, right? We could call them Moed. We could call them a Zman, right? A specific time. There's Mikra'e Kodesh, it's also called many times. But here we see the repetition of the word Moed. We also see Mikra'e Kodesh, but we see a lot of the word Moed. And a Moed is a fixed place in time or a meeting place in time. In modern Hebrew, right, we have a meeting or a committee is called a Va'adah, right? Like I have a meeting to discuss, something with my son's teacher and the principal. So it's called the Va'adah with, about that topic. The Parent Teacher Association is called Vad HaHorim, right? The committee of the parents, right? We have Vad HaBayit, right? The homeowners committee, right? So this word Vada and Moed have to do with specific meetings in fixed time. So the holidays are significant meetings in time between us and God, right? And this is connected also, again, why this name is brought here a lot and is significance to what we call the Mishkan here in Sefer Vayikra, which is the Ohel Moed, right? So we call it Ohel Moed. It is the meeting place, right? The tent of meeting. So now we kept talking, throughout the Sefer about Ohel Moed, about the meeting place, right, where we meet. And now we're going to talk about the meeting time. Okay, so this is another way we're seeing the borders between the Mishkan and the nation sort of open up, that we're becoming more bringing that Mishkan into the Machane, into our everyday life, right? Because these things and these ideas are not only significant to the specific place of Ohel Moed, but it's also very important in the time, in the Moadim, the Moadei Hashem, in that specific time period of the year. So what's interesting is, let's look for a second at the calendar of the Jewish holidays, right? The Jewish calendar, right? And we see that the calendar is a combined solar and lunar calendar. So what does that mean, right? Okay, so we have the solar calendar, which goes by the phases, the sun, right? The seasons and the sun. And we also have the calendar, which is the influence of the lunar calendar, which is the moon, right? Which goes by the phases of the moon. So we see this balance of the phases of the moon and the time periods of the year through the seasons. Okay, and both of those things have an effect on the way when we establish our holidays. Okay, so we see also when we talk about the solar side of the calendar, that has to do with the agricultural significance of the holiday, right? Because the sun, meaning the sun affects the seasons, right? Meaning the seasons, the weather, and therefore you have different agricultural times of year, which we'll talk about. And then the moon is not necessarily affecting. It's not necessarily connected to the seasons, because because it's not on the same pattern as the sun. So if you only follow a lunar calendar, you will be off of the seasons. You won't be always staying on the same pattern. So we see from this that there is both an extreme agricultural importance to the holidays as well as a historical importance. And we combine that in order to so I take that back. What is the importance of combining that? And why do we need to combine that? Well, not necessarily need, why did God establish the calendar to work in this way, right? And the Hagim. So if we look at first, let's take a step back and look at what did those entities represent? What did the sun and moon represent, right? So if we look at the ancient world, right, when the time the Torah was given, we realize that at that time, the people worshipped, not me, the people of the world at the time worshipped many, many different gods. And most of those gods, if not all those gods, had to do with nature. And the manipulation of those gods had to manipulate nature. You had the sun god, you had the rain god, and because the world at the time was such an agrarian, agriculturally focused world with these agrarian societies, and they were reliant on the proper weather patterns and rain patterns to ensure that their crops would grow successfully and that they would live a successful life. So this led people to to establish these natural entities, right? These, the sun, the moon, we spoke about in Mitzrayim, how a while back, how the Nile was a god, right? All these things that were significantly important to them, they took on as gods. And here, what's interesting is the calendar, the Jewish calendar, is not overlooking that. We're not saying that those entities, the sun and the moon and nature, is not important and not significant in our lives, but we are not making those entities into gods. We are acknowledging that those entities are from God, and God instilled in them. Sorry, how do I cancel this? Cancel. Sorry. Sorry, I just lost the pop-up came up and I lost my train of thought. 1 second. Okay, so we don't want to look at this as these entities as gods. Again, obviously they're not gods, but we acknowledge their importance and their significance in the world that God created and the laws of nature that he instilled, and how he uses those things to facilitate the world and the world, how it runs. So now if we look solely in regards to the sun and the solar calendar, we see that it's very God-centered. What do I mean by that? It shows us, right, when we look at this, it shows us an almighty creator creating and establishing these laws of nature, the cycle of the year, the cycle of the seasons, and this is how the world runs, right? You have these different distances from the sun at different parts of the year. Therefore, it creates the weather patterns, it creates the way the crops grow and all these things. And God put that in because he's an almighty God, and he created this whole structure, this whole pattern. But now we could look and say, but yes, that almighty God created that, and we obviously don't overlook that. It's amazing. But why are we assuming, or why do we take for granted that this almighty creator, this almighty being, is involved with his creations, right? And this is something that Amalek says, right? Amalek says they acknowledge that God created the world. They don't think that they don't not think that there is a God, but what they say is who's to say that God cares about me individually and my needs and my wants and my and the goings on of the world. He created the world and it's all random. But here, when we add on the aspect of the lunar side of the calendar, we see that this is God saying, I want to be involved with you in this process, in this yearly process. I want to be involved with you in this cycle, in this of creation, which essentially it is, right? Because the yearly cycle, if we're looking at it, we're very, very removed, and I'll mention this again. We're very removed from what it means to live in an agrarian society. So this is it's a little bit hard to relate. But if we think about it, that they were so that if there was a drought, or there was a storm and they ruined the crops, like that was it. There was nothing to do about it. They couldn't import food from somewhere. They couldn't go to a different grocery store. It's not like, so the fact that this is such a big thing, and God is saying, I want you to be involved in this creative process of the yearly cycle. How is he saying that? Basically, he's saying that by adding the lunar cycle into our yearly calendar, by saying, right, when we get the laws of Rosh Chodesh, of the first month, right, he says, Chodesh hazeh lachem, right? This is for you. This is your ability to determine the months, and it is your control and your responsibility, right? And this is something that is lost on us because we have a codified calendar in the modern times, right? But in ancient times, what they used to do was they literally every month they would have to have two witnesses, shnei edim, that would see the first phase and the first sighting of the moon, and that would establish the month, the Rosh Chodesh, which would essentially establish when the holidays are. So it was very, very tied into the people's involvement in creating establishing the time frame of when all these things are happening, right? And this is why when we say in the in the tefillot and the Kiddush and things like that of the holiday, we say Mekadesh Yisrael v'hazemanim. God gave Israel the kedusha, the ability to be makdish at the zmanim, right? It's Israel v'hazmanim, because Israel, God gave us the power as Israel to establish and determine these times, these holidays. And again, this goes back to what we keep calling the holidays here, Moadim. It's a fixed time to meet with God. And that is as much part of our responsibility as his, right? Meaning when you want to meet with someone, right? And I say, okay, we're going to have, whether it be work or social or whatever it may be, there's I don't like an unwritten contract, so to speak, that if we both establish this time, we're both responsible to be there at that time, right? If I say we're meeting at this place at 2:00 on Thursday, I have to get there at 2:00 on Thursday, and so do you, right? We both have to get there at 2:00 on Thursday. We're both partners in this, in this endeavor, whether it be a social meeting or a work meeting or whatever it may be. So again, this is a two-sided responsibility when we create this meeting in time. God is telling us that they have these holidays have to be in certain seasons, right? Pesach has to be in the spring. We'll talk about that in another second about all the agricultural significance, but there is a very important side of the time period of the year, which is aligned on the solar calendar, that we need to uphold to, which is God telling us when. But we also, in terms of the technicalities, we're involved with when the Rosh Chodesh is and when these holidays will be as well. This is all about being makdish zman, being sanctifying time and moed to establish this. And now, why is this different or additional to sharing a space, right? We kept talking about, the whole beginning was about, well, the whole end of Shemot and the beginning of Vayikra, and even continuing Vayikra, is about the building and construction and importance of making the space for us and God. So what is the addition? What is making these times also establishing, right? We have this space, it's great. We could go there. The Kohanim are there all the time. If you want to go give a korban, you go give a korban nedava all the time, whenever you want, right? What's the significance of these moadim of time that are being established here? And I think we could think about it in a very local term, in terms of unfortunately, right? You could share a space with someone and really not be connected to them, right? You could share a space, for example, with a roommate or a sibling or a spouse or your children, anyone who may be, and you may still feel very disconnected with them, even though you are sharing a space with them and you see them all the time. And it's important, even if you're seeing them all the time, to designate time where you will invest and really be face to face and involved in this relationship, as opposed to just side by side in the same space, if that makes sense. And I think this was really, for a lot of people, myself included, I think this was something that really was highlighted a little bit. The need for this, it was when Corona started and almost everyone was working from home, and you're in the same space as your family all the time, but there was also this weird feeling. I mean, maybe I'm the only one, but there's also this weird feeling of like, I see you all day, but did I really have a conversation with you? Did I really talk to you? Did we really, actually connect with each other in any way? Or we just kept passing each other in, as we were each doing, doing our own independent thing with, in the same space. So I think that that's something really necessary, is with a personal relationship with the people in your life, as well as with God, right? Is to really take that time and use that time and spend the time properly to emotionally and mentally connect with that person or with God. And this obviously takes time and effort, and therefore we're having these designated time. Now, let's look a second at the holidays and how they're presented here, and see what we could take from this context. So we said earlier that we have the Shabbat as well as Shosh Galim and the Yamim Noraim. And we are introduced to each of these holidays with their lunar date, and then we're told that they're Mecca Kodesh, a holy time, right? And work is prohibited, and a korban is offered. So we're getting all this information about the holidays. And we also see that that we have to refrain from work and use that time to bond and connect. Okay, and we see also that there is an additional solar agricultural element when we discuss the Shosh Galim in regards to that is mentioned. So in regards to Pesach, we see the discussion of the Korban HaOmer, right, which we bring, which is the beginning of the signifying the beginning of spring, right? And then this allows us to eat all the new grain that grows. We then have the Sukkot, which is the opposite side of this, which is 6 months later and the end of the season, right? When the harvest is finishing, and we pray that the winter rains will give us a successful crop the following year. Okay, so we see that there's this beginning and end process in regards to the cycle of the crops. And we also see in regard to Shavuot, there's no date given, but it's connected to Pesach, and we have to bring excuse me, we have to bring Shtei Alechem, the 2 loaves. And I think in a sense, this merges the 2 seasons because of planting and harvesting and spring and the coming of winter and the rainy season, is that we make this bread, which we are literally, when we make bread, we are literally, if you think about it, the whole process, we are literally partnering with God in creating something, right? If you're really harvesting the wheat, taking the kernel, grinding it, mixing it, growing all over it, all these things are us creating something with what God has given us. So we have this agricultural aspect of the holiday, of the time period of the year, of the crops, but we also have a historical or a personal side to us as a nation. And yes, the agricultural times are very significant, and these are times that many cultures celebrated and continue to celebrate, and because it holds significance of of their livelihood and their connection. But on a personal level, we see that God specifically took interest in Israel on a personal level in these times. So Pesach, which is in the spring, right, was not only the start of the agricultural year, but it's a renewal and growth, right? Spring is, everything starts to begin again. And this is when our freedom as a nation began, right? And Sukkot is just not when the harvest, where we evaluate and see what we grew. It is also the time where God literally built us homes in the Midbar to protect us and to connect with us. And whether we it's not a class about Sukkot, but whether we interpret the Sukkot as Sukkot Mamash, or actual Sukkot, or the Ananei Kavod, or the clouds, either way, it's showing God's investment and protection of us. And when we look at Shavuot, giving us the Torah, right, the holiday where we get the Torah, it's showing us that the purpose of our freedom from Pesach and the ability for us to have God dwell and connect with us is through the mitzvot he gives us in the Torah. So we see that there's I don't want to say general, but an agricultural significance to the holidays, but there's also a very personal and historical aspect. And we also see that in addition to each holiday being called the Moed, they're also called either a Shabbat or a Shabbaton, this idea of stalling and resting and having connection to what we do on Shabbat. Now, why is this significant? What is the Shabbaton aspect adding to the experience of the Hagim? And I think it's significant because every week, right, we are told to pause and evaluate. But at certain times of year, even more so, we are told to pause and evaluate. And those times are the significant agricultural times of year, because we need to take a step back and process where this all came from, and not, these are times where we could falter and be so confident, counting our money, so to speak, right? Looking at our crops and looking how well we did and evaluating the year, as opposed to really saying, wow, thank you, God, for allowing me to do well this year. Now, this idea of Shabbaton and Shabbat takes us to the topic of Shemita and Yovel, right, which is the Shabbaton of the land, right, the Shabbat Ba'aret. What is happening in the Shemita year, which actually, for those not in Israel, it is the Shemita year in Israel now, for those who aren't aware. And in the Shemita year, the landowners can't work their land. Everyone is able to go and eat from the produce, and they're not allowed to monetize it. Now, and in Yovel, the 50th year, meaning after 7 cycles of Shemitah, you have the Yovel. You have an additional thing where all the slaves go free. People are cleared of their debts, and all land goes back to its original owner. Now, in our day and age, and as someone living in Israel, I mean, there are other people that well, I'll say this second. There's different ways to experience and follow Shemitah. So one of the if you the most I don't know how to say this, the most like, I don't know what to say idyllic, but the most textbook way, so to speak, is that everything is hefker, everything is for everyone, and therefore that produce has a certain level of kedusha, of holiness. So when you eat it, you can't just throw it out like regular, like you can't throw out the peels. You have to put them in a sort of special, like not compost really, but a special thing that will keep them, and you can't make them rot. You have to take them out when they rot on their own. It's a whole thing. But many people, myself included, go by the heter mechira, which is the similar idea to when you sell your chametz on Pesach. What a lot of people do, a lot of farmers do, is they will sell their farm to a goy, to a non-Jew, and therefore work it as normal. And that food, because now it's technically owned by a goy, does not hold any significance, any special significance. So you could eat it and use it as regular. And a lot of places will follow that. There are some that don't. But like I know in my area specifically, it's specifically hard to find. If you want to eat the kedushat shavi'it, right, the specific kedushat shavi'it, it's not so easy to find. Most places are heter mechira, and the reason they do this is because now, I mean, it was established a while ago, but in modern Israel, when we're a global society and we're reliant on other countries, and we can't just stop our production and have to import everything, it'll just destroy the economy. So that you have this this heter, this leniency to rely on. But in a way, I feel like it takes away from the true goal of what Shemitah is really trying to show us. And what is that? Shemitah is really, if we look back again, these ideas are a little bit foreign to us, because we live in a society where if I want to eat something, I get in my car, or I walk down the block, and I go to the supermarket and I buy what I want, right? We're not going to the field and farming. Most people, I mean, there are obviously farmers, but most people are not. So in the agrarian society, there was a big disconnect between landowners and the workers, right? You had a very, very small portion of society that were the landowners, and the large portion of society were paid workers or slaves, right? They were either paid, and every 7 years, these landowners were put in their place, so to speak, and made to realize this is not my land. This is God's land that He's enabling me to use and to work, right? And even more so in the Yovel, even to a more extent, right? They realize that me as a human being can never fully own land or own people. Only God can, right? I can't own it. Meaning, yes, that person is my slave, but essentially he goes free. Whatever, at a certain point. And that land, yes, it's mine, but eventually it will always go back because it's God's land. So when we see that, it's sort of a big stop sign for the landowners to not get lost in their success and not forget everyone else around them. And instead of looking at it as, oh, look how great I am, I have this land, I'm so rich, is look at God gave me the ability to have this land and employ these people and help these people and create a more cohesive society. So also, by the way, I'm not going to go into this so much now, but we also have the laws of Mecca and Pe'ah in general, about the laws of how a landowner has to act with his field, and that there's certain portions he has to leave for the needy, right? There's all different things about that as well. Just to live a conscious life in not only focusing on yourself, but focusing on those around you to create a cohesive society. So to tie this all together, hopefully, right? These ideas of Shabbat and Moadei Hashem and the Hagim, Shemita and Yovel, right? Which hopefully we'll tie this all together. Is that I think the main theme here is creating a partnership between us and God in holiness, not only in space, but also in time, and to foster a relationship that allows for times when we appreciate and build a relationship, as well as not only getting lost in our worldly endeavors, specifically during these agricultural times where we might get lost in that, right? It makes us take a step back and define ourselves not by what we do or what we have or what our jobs are. And it really makes us look and take a step inward and see who we are and what kind of life am I really living, right? I actually saw something. I wish I could have found it. I was like scrolling through and I saw it and I said, wow, that's so interesting. And then I couldn't find it again. But it was basically showing how many adults will try to numb or forget or not deal with their feelings by being distracted and diving into, and, being a workaholic or watching a lot of TV or being, on their phone a lot, and to distract from the reality in their head and what they really need to deal with. And a more healthy way to cope with that is to really, to talk about, journaling and focusing and meditating and really being in tune to what's going on in your head, as opposed to drowning it out and seeing where that takes you. So I think that it's not only about our relationship with God, but also our relationship with ourselves. And the more we understand ourselves and connect with ourselves, the more we're able to understand God and connect with God. And it's like a double-edged sword, right? The more I develop my relationship with myself, and the more I'll be able to develop my relationship with God. And the more I develop my relationship with God, I'll be able to develop it with myself, right? It's like a balancing scale. So when we take these times in the year, these Moadim, to do that, right, and Shabbat weekly, and then the Moadim at different points in the year, we are able to hopefully use those times to ground us in not only in space, right, in the Mishkan, right, which again, at the time, we could always have chosen to go and do, if I felt so inclined, I could go give a korban, right? Nothing stopping me from doing that at that time. Right? Obviously now we can't, unfortunately, but it's even more than that, grounding us in space. We're grounded in time at these certain times to really take the energy and the focus. So as we have this time of Sfirat HaOmer that we're in now and Shavuot coming up, I think we should really hopefully be focused on that and use the time and not waste the time, right? And use it wisely. So thank you. Have a great week.